Every year on November 1st, everyone had to have all of their stuff out of the dorm they were in the year before to open it for the people who were moving up to a new dorm. It was always a known thing that I would always throw a Halloween party in my empty dorm room where everyone would go to. But this year, it was a roach infestation, so everyone had to leave the campus. I still threw the party and only invited the graduates to it to prevent us from getting caught. The party started around 9, and it was mainly a goodbye party since a lot of us weren't going to see each other again. As the clock struck midnight, most of our friends started to trickle out, leaving just 3 of us: Aaron, Viviana, and Brian, the quiet football player from our history class. Aaron, Viviana, and I were a trio and have been close ever since high school. We all grew up together and chose the college so we could all still be together. So it was normal for the 2 to stay behind to help clean up and talk. I was surprised that Brian stayed behind since he was only friends with Viviana, and they weren't really that close either. But I didn't think it was weird since we were most likely never going to see him again. We cleaned and made jokes about the infestation and killing roaches throughout the whole night. We sat on the couch to take a break and it got very boring very fast. I could feel Brian staring at me the entire time. He flirted with me the whole party, and I constantly changed topics to avoid his passes. He also kept doing things to impress me. I suggested playing Truth or Dare, hoping to change the mood. Brian leaned back, a strange grin spreading across his face, and indicated he'd rather talk about something more interesting. I asked what he meant, half laughing, trying to coax him into a better conversation. He suddenly turned serious, saying he could get away with murder. The intensity in his eyes made my stomach twist, and I thought he was joking at first. Erin's voice shook as she told him that wasn't funny. I took it as another weird way to try to impress me, but it would have been a weird way to show it. Brian continued, speaking about planning the perfect crime. Goosebumps prickled my skin as he spoke. I felt the mood shift from fun to dark in an instant. Trying to steer the conversation away, I suggested we watch another movie or play a game, but Brian ignored me, lost in his chilling scenarios. It was terrifying. Suddenly he turned too quickly, and in a moment of anger or excitement, he shoved Viviana, who had just returned from the bathroom. She hit the ground hard, and the sickening crack made my heart stop. I rushed to her side, yelling her name. She laid still with her neck twisted unnaturally. Erin screamed in panic, and I shouted at Brian, asking him why would he do that. He stood frozen for a second, his face twisting into shock and rage as he insisted it was an accident. I could hardly breathe. The room felt like it was closing in on me. I tried to pull Aaron away, but Brian lunged toward the door, blocking our only escape. He was a big guy, easily 6'3", and there was no way we could push past him. Aaron whispered that we needed to get out of there, her eyes darting around for a way out. I glanced at the window, but we were on the 4th floor. Jumping wasn't an option. Brian's anger escalated as he started throwing furniture around the room. Every time we would move closer to the door, he would run in front of it, yelling at us to stay inside the room. It had been hours since the party, so I knew everyone was already gone, and with the infestation, no one else was on campus. I pleaded with him to calm down, reminding him that we were his friends. He turned toward me, still seething, and accused us of thinking he would get in trouble for something he didn't mean to do. He pleaded for us to stay until he figured out how he could get away with this. Trying to buy us time, I urged him to breathe and suggested we could figure this out together. I knew the only way to stay alive at this moment was to do what he said. He could easily take us out. Erin's face was scared but determined. She realized what I was doing and played along. She pointed at the door, holding up 3 fingers and mouthing, "On 3." Brian was too caught up in his frenzy to notice. I needed a plan and reached for one of the beer bottles on the table, feeling its weight in my hand. Aaron began to count down, mouthing, 1, 2, 3. At that moment, everything snapped into focus. I swung the bottle at Brian's head, and it broke, making him bleed. Aaron screamed at me to run, and we both dashed past him. We bolted out of the room, adrenaline fueling our escape. My heart pounded as we raced down the hallway, the sounds of furniture crashing behind us, fading as we sprinted toward the stairwell. When we finally reached the lobby, a security guard was just coming through the door. We didn't even have to explain. We both collapsed in front of him, gasping for breath. Aaron urgently told the guard to call for help, as her eyes widened with terror. The guard immediately reached for the phone, and I looked back at the stairwell door, hoping he wouldn't come out. We told him we had to leave because he could be behind us. We waited outside. The police arrived quickly, and we recounted everything. They searched the building but found no trace of him. It felt surreal, sitting there in the lobby, watching officers come and go, knowing that someone I had once laughed with was now a killer. How everything was normally just a while ago, and with one action it changed everything. The police came to tell us that Viviana was dead and that her parents were on the way, and hoped we would be the ones to tell them, so we did. I will never forget her parents' screams and her mom dropping to the ground in pain. Months passed, and the memory haunted me. I kept expecting to see him at a store or a restaurant or anywhere, and for him to come get me. But it was like he had vanished. I tried to move on, but Halloween rolled around again and the memories flooded back. I didn't want to celebrate. The thought of a Halloween party made my skin crawl. Then, 2 years later, I heard from people who still attended that college that Brian had attempted to enroll again. My stomach dropped at the thought. I couldn't believe he would even try to come back after everything that had happened. When he showed up on campus, security was already alerted. They quickly detained him and the authorities were called. It turned out that he had been living in another state, but when he tried to return, they had enough evidence to arrest him for the incident involving Viviana. As the news spread, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. He would finally face consequences for what he had done. The weight of the past began to lift, knowing that he was no longer a threat. That Halloween I didn't celebrate, but I felt a sense of closure. I stayed inside the whole night, grateful for the safety of my walls. The memory of that terrifying night lingered, but the knowledge that Brian was behind bars brought me some peace. I knew I could finally move on, leaving the horrors of that night behind. On Halloween night, my friends, Rhea, Mason, and I were driving home from a party. We had our faces painted and costumes still on, and honestly, we were still high off the post-party adrenaline. As we turned onto a side street, we spotted a weird sign nailed to a tree. It was all lit up with fairy lights and said, "Real life escape room, open tonight." Mason asked to check it out. Rhea agreed, and they both talked me into following the directions of the sign. As we pulled up to the house, I felt a slight chill run down my spine. The house was old, maybe even a little creepy, with creaking wooden steps leading up to a front door that looked like it had seen better days. We got out, and the door swung open as if it had been waiting for us. Rhea and Mason practically ran inside the house. I hesitated for a second because I heard of escape rooms, but never really thought about doing one, especially not in some random house in the middle of nowhere. But they both shouted at me to come on and don't be lame. A woman in her late 30s greeted us with a wide grin. She looked cheerful, but something about her smile felt weird. Her husband stood behind her, tall and quiet, with no expression. It made me feel off about this whole thing, but Rhea and Mason were into the Halloween spirit and told me to loosen up. This is supposed to be scary. I calmed down and opened up to the idea that maybe he was off-putting because it was an act. "We're so excited for you to try our escape room. You'll need to solve puzzles to get out," the woman said. After a quick discussion, we agreed to go in. They took our phones for safety reasons, which I thought was a little odd, but didn't push it. The door closed behind us, and we found ourselves in a dimly lit room filled with strange decorations. Clocks, old books, and a giant locked chest in the middle. At first, it was fun. We raced against the clock, solving riddles and unlocking clues. I could feel our excitement building as we worked together, shouting out answers and laughing. But after what felt like no time at all, we managed to unlock the door that was supposed to lead us out. Only, it didn't budge. The same unsettling feeling from earlier came back as I tried twisting the doorknob harder. Rhea stated that it could be a trick and that it was a part of the whole act. I turned around and screamed in Rhea's face. I told her and Mason this is why I didn't want to come, and to stop saying that every little thing is a part of the act. Mason agreed with me and said he felt an uneasy feeling about the situation too. He said there was no mention of another escape room, only this one, and there is no other door but the door we entered that was locked. We all started banging on the door, calling for the owners. But there was no answer. Suddenly the door we came in slowly creaked open. We crept toward the door, and the woman reappeared, a manic gleam in her eye. Once so smiley and cheerful was now angry. She told us the game wasn't over yet and we beat it too early. Her husband walked in from behind her saying, "The real game begins now." Then suddenly a tall, heavy man entered the room holding an axe. He had on a bunny costume that looked newly clean and was spotless. The man said his costume has to get blood on it for Halloween. We all stood there in complete silence. My body grew with fear to the point I couldn't move a muscle. The woman calmly says, "You have 30 minutes to finish the puzzles and escape, or he'll use that axe on you." Then her husband switched out the old chest with a new one, and they both left while the man walked over to the corner of the room and stood still. The clock on the wall reset to 30 minutes. I could barely think straight, but I knew we had to act fast. We all knew we had no choice but to do as they said. We sprinted back to the chest, desperately prying it open to find a series of riddles. I could almost hear the ticking of an invisible clock counting down our fate. I felt the pressure mounting as we scrambled to piece together the clues. I looked back at the clock showing that we had only 10 minutes left. We were sweating and trembling, racing against time. Every puzzle we solved felt like a tiny victory, but the threat of that axe loomed larger with each passing second. Mason found a key hidden beneath a loose floorboard. We ran back to the locked door and tried to get it open. I looked back and forth, constantly watching to see if the man with the axe was moving. He wasn't, so I pushed Mason to get the door open faster. With a shaky hand, Mason finally turned the key. The door opened and we bolted out into the hallway. We looked back one last time and saw the man with the axe sprinting at us. We sprinted down the hall, handing towards the front door. I glanced back to see the man raising the axe, but we didn't stop. We made it outside and kept making a beeline to the car. Without looking back, we scrambled into my car and slammed the doors shut. Once I got my key into the ignition, the man pounded on the car door. He lifted up the axe to try to take a swing, but we sped away. I glanced at Rhea and Mason. Their faces were pale, reflecting my own horror. We didn't say a word for the whole drive home. That night, as I laid in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. It was supposed to be a fun Halloween adventure, but it turned into a real-life nightmare. I distanced myself from Rhea and Mason since that night, because I felt like it was their fault for talking me into what could have been my death. I was 18 at the time when I was babysitting in a rich area. For context, I was babysitting an 8-year-old boy named Tim, whose parents were out of state and his father was a realtor. I took him trick-or-treating at 5 until 6:30 since that was his bedtime. I put him to bed and kept passing out candy until 8. The town's curfew was 8 for trick-or-treating, so I started cleaning up the house and put all the candy away. I sat on the couch afterward watching true crime docs on YouTube until the doorbell rang. I opened the door to a small child who looked like she was 3 or 4 years old. She was with an older man who didn't have a costume but was wearing only a mask. I gave her candy, and before I could close the door, the man asked who was I. I explained to him that I was watching over the house and who was he. He mentioned that he lives close by and pointed to a house across the street and said he was close to the owners of the house and was just curious since he is the neighborhood watch leader. I was very naive back then and instantly believed him. I fully opened up and explained to him why I was there. He stood there for what felt like 5 minutes, just staring at me after I was done talking. I felt uneasy and told him goodnight. Before he left, he said, "Well, you would have to do," and just walked away with the child. I was confused about why he said that, but just brushed it off, thinking I misheard him. I continued watching movies until I fell asleep. I woke up around 11 after hearing a loud crash come from upstairs. I walked upstairs and saw Tim close his bedroom door and shout at me to run as he ran down the stairs. I asked him what happened, and I saw a man wearing the same mask as earlier rush out of the room with a machete-looking large knife. He ran towards me, taking a swing at me, but I grabbed his arm and we fought over the weapon. He kicked me, and I fell down the stairs. I could barely see and knew I probably got a concussion, but I knew that if I didn't run then, I would have died. I ran out of the house screaming for Tim. He called for me from the next door neighbor, and they called the police. They found the man and arrested him. He said he wanted to kill me and Tim because his dad didn't give him the house that he pointed at earlier, and that he was planning on killing the whole family that night, but thought Tim and I were enough. I was 9 at the time when my friend and I experienced this. Its trauma bonded us for life. Before this night, my mom never went trick-or-treating with us. Katie and I have been going alone every year since 1st grade because of how safe our neighborhood was. It was one of the safest areas in the United States growing up. We never saw anything bad, and the whole neighborhood sheltered all the kids. So, we were never taught, especially at 9, how dangerous people can be. We left the house pretty early and stayed out very late trying to go to every house and to see who could get the most candy between us. We even went to the houses that didn't have any decorations or showing any signs they were home, which I now know was a big mistake. We saved my street last since it was always a tradition to go back to my house and eat candy together, and Katie would sleep over. We had a fun time until one house that was on my street. The house didn't have decorations, and lights from the inside were off. We went to the door like every other house and rang the doorbell yelling trick or treat. No one answered, so Katie rang it twice. I told Katie that we should go to another house. She suggested that we wait, but I walked away. Before I could reach the curb, the door opened. She yelled trick or treat, and a tall older man who looked like he was in his 50s stood over her. He was wearing a greasy t-shirt with his belly sticking out at the bottom. The expression he showed on his face was very dismantled. I ran towards her and apologized over and over again to the man. When I made it to the door with her, a woman who looked around the same age as he did pushed him to the side and grabbed Katie's arm. She yanked away from her, and the woman told us to leave their property before she turned us into a squished pumpkin. We both ran as fast as we could straight to my house. When we went inside, my mom was getting ready to leave for work. She was a nurse and always worked until the next morning. I normally would stay at the house by myself, but my mom told me my brother was an hour away since she knew I would have nightmares on Halloween from watching horror films with Katie. She knew we would be okay since we were only going to be alone for an hour. We went upstairs to watch horror movies and eat our candy. We finished one movie and went to the next, so I knew my brother was running late. About halfway through the second movie, we heard the back sliding door open and close. I assumed it was my brother and shouted out that he finally made it. We heard rustling in the kitchen and the TV turned on downstairs. We still didn't think it was weird and just assumed my brother was drunk and was crashing out on the couch instead of going to his room. That was until I got a text from my brother saying he was close and sorry he was late. My stomach dropped and I showed the text to Katie and we both ran into my closet. My closet door was the kind where you could see outside but couldn't see inside. I called the police explaining to them that someone had broken in and I was only 9 with no parents home. Then we saw someone come into my room. I noticed it was the same man from that house. He had one of the knives that was in the kitchen. Behind him, the woman joined him in the room. They searched the room whispering they knew we were in there. They flipped my bed and broke the shelves that were on my wall. They left, and I was able to tell the operator my address. It got very quiet, and then within a second the man ran back into my room yelling, "I found you," as he opened the closet door, laughing hysterically at us. He tried to stab Katie but missed her and hit the wall instead. I dropped my phone and we both sprinted out of my room down the stairs. I ran towards the front door while Katie ran towards the back. We glanced at each other, realizing we split up, and the woman ran out of the kitchen looking back and forth at each of us. We both ran in the opposite direction, and the woman ran after Katie. I ran in the middle of the street screaming for help. One of my neighbors stopped me asking what was wrong. I explained to her and she called the police as well. My mom and brother were called as well. When the cops showed, they found the woman hiding in a trash can at one house where Katie got help from, and the man was sitting on the couch eating candy while watching the television in the living room with the knife in his hands. It was the first time a crime happened this badly in our neighborhood, and it changed the town and certainly mine and Katie's life forever.